Hello, Exorcist. It's your lead exorcist, Jamie, here solo today, just doing an impromptu pod right now. It's December 15th, and this is my first year doing a podcast, and this has just become a lot more fun and a lot more interesting, and I would guess say by that standard, by those measurements, successful than I had ever thought this would be. And as I was reflecting on the end of the year and how I wanted to end the year with a podcast, I was thinking the holidays are coming around and I don't really have any plans for any more guests for now until the end of the year. And Ryan and I are actually completely taken off for Christmas. We're actually taking a cruise to the Bahamas for an entire week. And then it'll be New Year's. And so basically the year is coming to an end. And if I didn't get another podcast out before basically now, I probably wouldn't before the end of the year. And so I wanted to at least have one more episode to celebrate the end of the year and the holidays. So without further ado, thank you again, everyone who has just been so supportive of this really fun, creative project and helped by liking and sharing and leaving comments. It's just been amazing. It's been far more incredible than I could have ever imagined. My New Year's resolution and my goal for the podcast for next year is really, I think, pretty simple, but I actually think it's going to be a little bit more difficult than that. I would like this to pay for itself. So I'm definitely not going to run ads. Some other podcasts that I know use this service called Buy Me a Coffee, where they just ask people that really enjoy the podcast just to, buy me a coffee. But, instead of buying myself a coffee, I'll just use that money to go towards paying for the services that used to record this podcast, whether that be Riverside FM or maybe upgrading to a better microphone. And so that's my goal for next year is to basically be able to fund myself. And to be able to fund myself, that means I'm going to have to be able to grow, which is fine. I got myself business cards so I could be able to tell people in real time about the podcast. Maybe go to some horror conventions in town or something, and then actually maybe try to snag some people for the podcast that maybe might make it go a little bit viral. So that's my plan is to grow so that I can get enough buy-in to get a couple bucks. So yeah, that's my goal for next year. But the focus will never not be creative. As soon as this ever becomes a financial endeavor or feels like too much work, then that's where I've gone astray with this podcast. So I will always have that in the back of my head. So without further ado, the topic of today's podcast is going to be the best movies of 2025, according to me. And so you might notice that this is a little bit off topic because I'm not taking a specific movie and naming some themes around it. I'm actually taking the entire body of work of 2025 and I'm going to count it down and tell you what my favorite movies were. Some of the movies I've talked about on the podcast before, some I have not. And hopefully you'll find this episode useful. Maybe during the holidays when you're off of work and you don't have a whole lot to do, you can use it as a little bit of a guidepost to maybe choose some movies to watch because there's so many good movies that came out in 2025. It was such a good year for horror. And I hope you maybe choose some movies for yourself. I will say I'm also in the Friends of Horror Weekly group, and we do a little project in there where we all conglomerate our lists into one master list, and we are able to sort of rank all the movies from 2025 based on everybody's individual lists. And that's a project that I do for that group, which is so fun. So that's going to be something completely separate. I'm not going to talk about that group's list. I'm saving all of that for that group. And I think Horror Weekly may or may not publish a podcast based on that work, but this is strictly my preferences for 2025. And so without further ado, and I'm totally winging this, y'all. I knew I wanted to do this podcast, but I didn't have any idea how I wanted to go forward with it. So yeah, I just kind of winged it here a little bit. So, and also, if you are watching this on video, you will see that I have my little holiday antlers on, which I just think are so festive. Ryan, also one of his nicknames for me is Deer. And so, yeah, I'm just dressed up like an actual deer today. All right. So without further ado, I also want to recognize that I have not seen every 2025 movie that has come out this year because I know there's a lot of indie movies, obscure movies. There's even some pretty popular movies that have come out this year that I have not watched. And honestly, it is useful being part of a large group because when certain movies, because it's so hard to get to the theater to see all the new movies that come out or rent all the movies. I don't ever have any of all the streaming services at one time. And so if a certain movie starts getting a lot of just like generally everybody says they don't like it, then I just don't really bother with it, to tell you the complete truth. So there's movies like The Black Phone 2 and Him that I didn't go see, which are movies that I really had wanted to go see, but honestly, they just like did not get good reviews from anybody in my horror weekly group. And I just because of that, I just didn't bother to go see them. So like I said, I haven't seen all the movies out this year. I actually have not seen Death of a Unicorn for the same reason. I haven't seen Y2K. I haven't seen Get Away. A couple movies like that. So there's a lot of movies I haven't seen that you're not going to hear about on this list. I will say now, sometimes the Friends of Horror Weekly group, there'll be a big disagreement. Sometimes someone will really like a movie, sometimes people will really dislike movies. And whenever that happens, I will most certainly see the movie, because if it's a polarizing movie, to me, that says, ooh, I need to see that movie. Because, like, to me, a sign of a good movie is if it can be polarizing. But if everybody's generally kind of like, then I just won't see it. Anyways, so I have with that being said, I did see 41 2025 horror movies this year. That and when I say 2025 movies, these are 2025 United States theatrical releases or straight to streaming in 2025. So that means that a movie could have been released in a foreign country, or maybe they have like a limited release at a film festival, but they're not released theatrically in the United States. And so that's how I will define the movies. It's a 2025 United States release, either to streaming or to theaters. And so with that being said, I'm not going to go through every single movie, but I am going to go through my list and kind of tell you about uh, movies that I'm pretty sure that y'all have heard of that may be lower on the list. For example, so again, I have 41 movies on the list. Okay, I will say shout out to number 41 on my list, which is Popeye's Revenge. Thank you, Bobby Robertson from the Friends of Horror Weekly group, for volunteering as tribute to watch 3 different Popeye movies that came out this year. And apparently they were all bad, but I think Popeye's Revenge was the only one that was even remotely watchable, but it was still pretty bad. So it got 1 star from me and ended up at 41 on my list. I will say my star system goes from 1 to 5. And then I will say probably the next most famous movie that you might have heard of is called Hell of a Summer. It's sitting at number 38. It was directed by Win Wolfhard, and he also stars in it. He's one of the kids from Stranger Things, and unfortunately, just wasn't good. The Gorge. Now that also is very low on my list. That is at number 37. That was actually one of the first horror movies that I saw of 2025, and I was like, oh no, if this is how 2025 is going to go, it's not going to be a very good year. But luckily, 2025 did shape up to be an excellent year for horror. The Gorge just was not very good. Give it 2 stars. That movie stars Miles Teller and Anya Taylor-Joy, Sigourney Weaver. It should have been a good movie, but it was just all over the place. All right, as I continue, at number 35, you have Vicious, which was a Dakota Fanning movie. And again, it was okay. I gave it actually 2.5 stars. So this should tell you how good that 2025 movies were, because I am giving a movie that is ranked number 35 out of 41 an average rating. And so that just should tell you how things fell this year. Lots of very, very good movies. And so even an average flick is like flying on the very, very low end of the list. Um, so then the next movie that you might have heard of is sitting at number 26 on my list, called 28 Years Later. I gotta say, a lot of people are not going to agree with me on this. A lot of people thought this was one hell of a movie. It was directed by Danny Boyle, who was actually the director of 28 Days Later, which was the first entry in the 28 Days Later franchise. So if you back up, and I'm not going to get the years right, but the first 28 Days Later movie in the franchise, now 28 days, 28 weeks. Now you got 28 years later. 28 Days Later was Cillian Murphy. That was like early 2000s, I think. Oh my God, I'm probably going to get that wrong, but it was like early 2000s. It's been 20 something years ago. Maybe even 28 years ago. Um, Wakes up in London and the world's apocalyptic. And for me, this is the first time I remember seeing fast zombies. And I gotta say, I'm not really a big fan of zombie movies in general, but I really love 28 Days Later because to me, the movie is more about relationships and the horror of when relationships don't cooperate and don't work well. And then you got the backdrop of the pressure and the stress going on with the zombie apocalypse and whatnot. So absolutely loved Danny Boyle's 28 Days Later. 28 Weeks Later was okay, wasn't that great. Then you had 28 Years Later that came out this year. That was an incredible film. It got 3 stars, y'all. I gave this star 3 out of 5 stars and at 26 on my list. It was an incredible film. It was beautifully visually beautiful. It starred Jodie Comer. You might know her from Killing Eve if you like that show. And Aaron Taylor Johnson, you might know him from Nosferatu and probably some other things. It was heartbreaking and that movie was disjointed for me. I will say I did enjoy the movie, but there was other movies that I preferred more for 2025. And then I gotta say, the next movie on my list is also going to be a big disagreement for a lot of people. So sitting right next to 26, number 25 is Bring Her Back. So a lot of people have Bring Her Back, and by I say a lot of people in my horror group have Bring Her Back as like their number 1 movie. And so for me to have this down at number 25, I know is a radical departure. I've had so many conversations with people about Bring Her Back, including my best friend Julie, who has been on this podcast a few times. Hey, Julie, about my reasons for not preferring this movie. Because it's not that the movie's a masterpiece. It was beautifully shot. It was brilliantly fucking acted. The story was great. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. I just have such a major problem with this movie that I just could not get over it. Uh, this movie was so hard for me to rank on my list because I did have so much respect for the cinematography, the story, the horror elements in this. This movie was absolutely fucking horrific. I could have ranked it easily in the top 10, or I could have ranked it number 40 based on how it made me feel. This movie made me feel like dog shit after I left the movie, and I felt like dog shit for days after seeing this movie. And don't get me wrong, I also don't. This is all gonna sound so like I'm totally contradicting myself. I think it is such a good sign, a good hallmark of a great horror movie when a movie leaves you feeling like shit, or because if a movie can make you feel some type of way, it has accomplished its mission at art. The big problem that I had with this movie is, to me, it ventured into exploitation for no purpose, in my opinion. I know a lot of people disagree with that, but there was gore and exploitation of the child in this movie past the point of discomfort. There was moments in this movie where you got pushed to the point of the discomfort. Well, me, I'm speaking for myself. I got pushed to the points of discomfort. And they kept pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing. I don't mind it when filmmakers put really shitty stuff in movies. Like, I'm just going to use rape, for example. Rape, sexual assault. If it's a means to an end of the story. But if a filmmaker is just putting exploitive things in a movie just for shock value, I just can't get behind it. Because if you have to use shock value to engage your audience, I just think that there's more powerful tools. There's a better way to do that without being exploitive. So that's what I got to say about that. Yeah, big feelings about this movie. Also, will fully admit, I don't mind it when movies reflect my own trauma or my own reality. I much prefer going to movies where I can experience a sense of escapism, or I don't mind movies that mirror my own experience because there's a sense of release and a sense of escapism in that. But there was something about this movie, like the mother in this movie, she was the best. She deserves all the awards. Sally Hawkins, who played Laura, she was epic, and she reminded me so much of my mother that it was just not even funny. It didn't even feel like a mirroring. It didn't feel like a catharsis to see it played out because there was no there was no catharsis in this movie for me. So, like the drinking with the kids and like everything was kind of on for her own personal gain. This like selfish aspect that she had to her, which I have different feelings about my mother now. But obviously, I know that Sally Hawkins and that her character in that movie was acting out of grief, but it was just too much. All right, I've beat that horse to death. Sorry. All right, moving on to number 21. And I realize I'm making big jumps here, but I'm only hitting the movies that I think are just noteworthy to talk about, either high or low on my list. Um, Number 21 is Good Boy, which I have an entire podcast on. So if you would like to hear more of my thoughts on Good Boy, you can go find that podcast. That movie has a 3.5 stars, sitting at number 21 on my list. So next, I want to come to number 19. Y'all, I gotta say, number 19 for me is The Rule of Jenny Penn. And every time I put a movie ahead of Jenny Penn, it hurt my feelings. I'm like, I don't want to keep booting this movie because I think this movie is so brilliant. This movie is directed by James Ashcroft and it stars Jeffrey Rush and John Lithgow. John Lithgow is unfucking hinged in this movie. He gives one of the most, like, for a horror villain, scariest performances, right up there with Sally Hawkins' character, I will say, from Bring Her Back. And the concept of the rule of Jenny Penn was something that I don't think we've ever seen before in horror. I think it was a unique concept taking place in a nursing home, the horrors of a nursing home, and what it's like to get to the end of your life and not only reflecting on your own past, your own history, living with your own body, your own mentality, your own problems at the end of life, how horrifying that can be, then also dealing with a villain in that same space. It was just absolutely unique and encapsulating until it wasn't. The problem with this movie is that it does start to drag at some point, and that's why it just it got, I think this movie got 3.5 stars. Yeah. And so as other movies started to score higher than 3.5 stars, I kept just having to push this movie back. I'm like, oh no, I really wanted this movie to score higher, but it didn't. And thus, all right. Moving on, at number 18 is Companion. Number 17 is Ash. Ash was a very surprising movie. I did not expect to like this movie. I typically do not care for sci-fi horror. This movie takes place 100% out in outer space, but this movie was so much fun, and it had little moments of like sneaky humor in it, and it had this social commentary element to it. It was really good, and I did, like I said, I did not expect to like it, but I did. So it ended up at number 17. And then number 16 is Dangerous Animals. Number 15 is It Feeds, which I have an entire episode on It Feeds. So if you want to know more about It Feeds, I suggest you go check out that podcast as well. While on the topic of It Feeds, I did an entire podcast from the perspective of It Feeds as the it, and It Feeds as what is known in internal family systems therapy theory as an unattached burden, meaning something that belongs in your emotions, in your psyche, in your well-being, that does not belong to you. Some people call that spirit possession. Some people call that demons. Let's just say I don't want to say too much about it right now because I just almost can't even believe that it's real and it's going to happen. But let's just say I have a special guest that's going to be coming on early next year that is going to be talking more about unattached burdens. And I literally just like I can't wrap my head around it. So I know some of you listened to the It Feeds episode and maybe I got a little bit too heady, a little bit too theoretical about it. But this is a topic that I'm just really, really passionate about: internal family systems, unattached burdens, the spiritual nature of it. So I'm really hoping this will be a little bit of a redo podcast from a totally different perspective. And I hope that will be able to share in my passion with y'all in a way that I am not great at communicating. And I know this is a whole lot of mystery that I'm putting out there, but I'm putting it out there for a reason. I'm just teasing it because I am so over the moon excited. And I also don't want to reveal it yet. So just leaving that out there as a teaser for early next year podcast that I have scheduled with somebody. And number 14 is Heart Eyes, which was a horror comedy that was so much fun. And it took place in the Pacific Northwest. And so, yeah, just those elements right there made it a lot of fun for me. I don't typically like slasher movies, but the horror comedy element of this just made it really high on my list. Heart Eyes had the same flavor of horror comedy to me as Drag Me to Hell. There was some sort of self awareness to it that the movie had where it kind of knew it was silly and it kind of knew it was funny and they knew that they were ridiculous. And I really appreciate that in a movie. And I gotta say, it was a horror comedy, but also a horror romance, if that's a possible thing. And so I really, really, really like it had an ending that just made me so happy. I don't necessarily need a happy ending for horror movies, but this movie just really did it for me. Number 13 is Final Destination. So, Final Destination Bloodlines. Okay, unless you've been under a rock for the last, I don't know, 25 years maybe, you know Final Destination because it's been a franchise that's been out forever. I don't know how many Final Destination movies there are now, like 6, 7, something like that. This movie was Final Destination in 2025. It had all the great effects, it had all the great acting, all the current things about Final Destination. It had Tony Todd giving his last message to the audience, which was really special. And yet, unlike some of the later Final Destination movies, it returned to form of all the things that were really good about the earlier Final Destination movies. The gold rubric, where one thing activates another thing and then another thing, and the next thing you know, someone's dead in some crazy, insane, gory fashion. And so to me, this was very traditional, all the good things about Final Destination that made it good in 2025. It paid homage to the franchise. Loved it. Let's see. I'm trying to let me back up for just a second. From Hard Eyes on, these are all 4-star movies. And ironically enough, at number 12 is The Conjuring, which I can almost copy and paste everything I just said about the Final Destination movies. I loved The Conjuring Last Rites for a lot of the same reasons I just said I really like the Final Destination movies. To me, it did all the really great things that the previous Conjuring universe did when it came to highlighting the love between the Warrens. Let's be very clear, there's a difference in the fictional Warrens and the real life Warrens. They had a very, very checkered history, and Mr. Warren was a suspected child molester. He had a live-in girlfriend that was underage. Anyways, it's a whole thing. But it returned to the fictional Warrens' love story, which is so, so cute between Vera Farmiga and Patrick Wilson. And it had the whole helping out the family story. It had the possession. It had the mystery. It had more about their family story, which I loved. I know a lot of people didn't like it, but I really liked it. And so it's a nice, sentimental, warm-hearted possession Conjuring movie. Loved it. I know a lot of people are not fans of the Conjuring universe, but one of my most favorite horror genres is any kind of possession or demon movie or religious horror, which obviously that's one of the reasons why my podcast is called The Exorcist Within. And obviously The Conjuring does a lot of that. So I just cannot help but to really like the Conjuring movies. In fact, The Conjuring 2 is one of Ryan's favorite horror movies. And I will never forget the scene from The Conjuring 2 where Valak, the nun, comes out of the painting. That's to me in recent horror history, I mean, recent as in like the last 10 years or whatever, is one of the most horrifying moments that I can remember seeing in a theater where I was like backing up in my seat, like, oh my God, get away from this thing. All right, number 11, we're getting so close to my top 10. I gotta say, yeah, I think this is definitely gonna be outside of my top 10. So let me just preface this by saying my 1 through 7, top 1 through 7 feel pretty solid 1 through 7 movies. And 8 through 10 feel like they could be kind of interchangeable. And 11 was a really close call, but just outside of my top 10 is going to be Together. So Together is a body horror film that starred Dave Franco and Allison Brie, which was they are a real life married couple, and they are a married couple in this movie. And this movie is about being together. Because Dave Franco and Allison Brie are married in real life, they have this amazing chemistry on screen, which made this an incredible movie. Overall, I will say this movie seems to be some kind of commentary about losing yourself in another person. And again, that's super high level. I'm just trying not to spend a whole lot of time on any one of these movies, but I don't know. I think this movie again. The body horror was good. The storyline was a little bit rough in places. This movie was super well done. I think honestly the biggest reason why this movie is at number 11 was the chemistry between the two actors. It was just a really, really good. The acting was really incredible, so convincing. As a therapist, I will say in society we have these sort of messages that have emerged. People are so quick to throw out the word codependent, right? Like being codependent is bad. Being dependent on your partner is so bad. And I think this movie was sort of meant to reflect that being codependent's bad, being dependent on your partner is bad. Though I will say this movie does show the extreme version of that. Obviously, to the extreme this movie goes, no bueno. But I do not exactly care for this reflection of this theme that you're not supposed to be dependent on your partner, that you're not supposed to have any level of interdependence. It's almost like we were made to feel it's like the movie wanted us to feel like James Franco was like some kind of man child and Alison Brie was some kind of I don't even remember now to tell you the truth. But since I've become a therapist and I've studied emotionally focused therapy, the science behind attachment, the biggest thing that I've taken away from that is that it's not wrong. It's not a bad thing to be dependent on others. Polyvagal theory, which is the science of relationships, of survival by being in relationships with other people, whether that be romantic or friendships or community, acquaintances. And so I don't know where this narrative came from in our society that codependence and we should all be fiercely independent and not dependent on two other people. Science tells us that it's unhealthy to think like that. And some level of, I don't even like the word codependence, throw it out. Interdependence is healthy. Co regulation with other humans is healthy. And we shouldn't be ashamed of it. So if you find someone in your life that completes you, that's able to do things that you're not, and you're able to do things for them that you're not, what's the big deal? Stop letting society telling you that's a bad thing. So, anyways, that's my little soapbox about that. I actually had considered doing a podcast about this movie. Ryan and I were going to do one together when we came back from the theater, but we were just not on the same page about this movie, so we just ended up canning the idea. Folks, of course, after I create this podcast on Monday, I believe, I would end up watching an additional horror movie that I just really loved. And that movie was called The Home. And I love this movie so much that I ended up putting this movie at number 11 on my list for 2025. I may not have even come back to edit this podcast if this movie didn't land so high on my list for the year, but it just barely missed my top 10. But y'all, don't sleep on the movie The Home. This movie is so good. The Home is a movie that stars Pete Davidson. This movie was super unique. I almost didn't watch this movie because I had a lot of bad reviews online. But as I mentioned earlier in this podcast, I typically don't care about online reviews. But, I do respect opinions in the Horror Weekly group. But there wasn't a lot of talk about this movie. So I decided to watch it actually as a watch party in the Friends of Horror Weekly group. So I watched it with someone else in the group and we both loved it. This movie is a bit of a slow burn. By slow burn, I mean it takes a while to build the story, but once this movie takes off, I will say the ending of this movie was 5 fucking stars. Trust me, the ending of this movie is worth the build. And even the moments during what I'm calling the build of this movie just make you go, what the fuck? Like nonstop. So I highly recommend the movie The Home. I think Pete Davidson did such a great job in this movie. His range of emotions, I was really, really impressed with him. I've never seen him in a movie before. I always thought he was super hilarious on Saturday Night Live. But his emotions, it ranged from just heckin' concerned to afraid to royally pissed off, to say the least. I think he carried this movie on his back for sure and did an incredible job. So, highly recommend The Home. All right, y'all, getting into number 10. And I'm actually going to do a little exercise while I go through my top 10 because I haven't actually, again, I'm just totally winging this episode as I go. But I'm going to tally up just for funsies, like categories of horror, like subgenres. So, and I'm sure a lot of these are going to fit into multiple, and so it's not going to be perfect. But I'm just kind of curious. I'm curious what I think the best subgenres were this year. So, starting with number 10 is Presence. Number 10 is Presence, and that is a Steven Soderbergh film that has Lucy Liu and a bunch of other folks I don't really recognize, to tell you the truth. We'll call that a ghost story. So, Presence is a movie from the point of view of a ghost. And we're experiencing this family through the point of view of a ghost. And we don't know who the ghost is. We don't know we don't know who the ghost is, and we don't know why the ghost is there. We don't know what it wants. The ghost seems particularly attached to the daughter in this movie, to the point where the daughter thinks that it's her friend that died, and is starting to reveal herself to the daughter. The ghost is starting to reveal itself to the daughter. It's got an incredible, incredible ending. It's one of the best endings I have ever seen in a horror movie. The surprise ending is absolutely incredible. Sometimes you watch movies and they're like, they drop hints or they drop little clues as to what's going to happen. And you're like, God damn, that's very obviously a clue. The way they do it, it's almost like they look at the camera and they like tell you the clue. But they look at someone else and they like tell you the clue. The way they drop hints in this movie is so subtle that when you find out who the ghost is, you're just like, duh. And then all the pieces start to fall together. In retrospect, all the dominoes start to fall. And it's so brilliant. There's also some interesting family dynamics that are going on in this movie in the context of the haunting. And so, yeah, it was just a movie that I very much enjoyed. There's a character in this movie that I want to talk about because I think I'm the only person that felt this way about this character. I've heard some commentary about this person. And again, I'm not going to say who it is exactly, their role in this movie completely, but I've heard a lot of commentary about this particular character, that people did not like this character. They thought he was insincere. This character, it's a teenage boy, and he basically starts this friendship with the daughter in the movie. And they had this dialogue together at one point where he's telling her how lonely he is, and he starts to think about suicide, and he feels like he needs to be in control. Maybe like suicide is the only way he can get in control. And a lot of people called bullshit on that, but like I gotta say, as someone who has worked with crisis centers and have done a lot of training on teen suicide and just this deep, deep dive on what suicide is driven by, I gotta say, that character was surprisingly, in my opinion, so convincing and so authentic to the teenage experience and to the experience of someone with suicidal ideation, someone who is just so lost and feels out of control that they need to do things to feel in control. I will say this also comes from my own personal perspective of feeling like nobody has any bad parts, truly, which is an IFS theoretical framework, that none of us have truly bad parts to ourselves. We have maladaptive parts that don't know how to get our needs met, except for doing not so great things sometimes, and that can manifest in being argumentative to murder. So don't recommend. I'm not justifying murder. I'm not justifying bad behavior. I'm just saying that people just don't wake up and do bad shit. So that philosophy also drives my career in capital sentence mitigation work these days, where I fight for people who are sitting on death row or they're trying to put on death row. All right. That was Presence. Number 9 is Weapons. I think I also have Weapons a little bit higher than most people that I know. I loved it. It's a 4 stars. We're still in 4 stars territory. This movie has Julia Garner, Josh Brolin, and it was directed by Zach Kreger, who a lot of you may know from doing Barbarian a couple years ago, who starred one of my favorite Scream Kings, Justin Long. So what I will say is Weapons is told in multi-parts, and it unfolds, in my opinion, a little bit slow. And some of the people's stories that they tell in the movie, I just don't think were really added to the story at all. And I wanted to like this movie had potential to be like a number 1 or probably, I don't know if it could have ever competed with like number 1, 2, and 3 on my list this year, but it could have been a little bit higher. But I do think this movie was a little bit too long and it drug a little bit, but the ending in this movie was absolutely epic. The villain in this movie was abso-freaking-lutely amazing. In fact, the villain in this movie is someone who has been nominated for some awards for this award season. She is absolutely amazing. She's right up there with the villain from Bring Her Back. Just absolutely stellar performance. Next, moving on down, we've got number 8, The Surrender. I did an entire podcast about The Surrender, so I'm not going to talk anymore about it. You can go find that podcast. That podcast was really through the lens of grief and loss and ritual. I think this movie was kind of a lower budget movie, definitely than some of these other movies on this top 10, especially. But for the emotional impact it had and the story that it tried to tell was absolutely, in my opinion, top 10 worthy. Uh, a double bill of The Surrender and Bring Her Back would be absolutely uh, devastating. Don't recommend it, but they are very similar in their plot lines in a lot of ways. But I highly recommend The Surrender. Go listen to that podcast, especially if you're curious to hear. I gotta say, y'all, when I think back on my podcast that I've done this year, the Surrender podcast was one of my favorite podcasts, and that's because of the guest that I had. Her name was Laurie. She was a grief and death expert, basically, after her years of working in and doing funeral arrangements through nonprofits and working in hospice, and having her on as an expert and to have her lens for the movie was absolutely made that episode so impactful and so meaningful. And I learned a lot, and I think my audience learned a lot too. So, number 7 is Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein. You probably have heard that Guillermo del Toro has wanted to make this movie forever. Stars Oscar Isaac, Jacob Elordi, Christopher Waltz, Mia Goth. I love Christopher Waltz. Anything that he's in, he just plays the most fantastic villain. So, this movie was absolutely visually stunning. To me, Jacob Elordi and Mia Goth ran away with the performance. Every time they were on screen together, I was just in puddles. They really portrayed the power of attachment. This is what I was talking about, exactly what I was talking about just now for Together. Their portrayal of healthy attachment was spot on. And contrasting that with how Victor treated his creation was exactly, again, just the contrast of that shows why safe and kindness goes a lot further. Honey is sweeter than vinegar, as they say. It's very, very much a distilled way of saying it. Loved it. Frankenstein is my favorite novel of all time ever. I read it in high school. I did a massive paper on it that was the most fun, to this day, the most fun writing assignment I've ever done in my life. So this book being so special to me, I really had high expectations for the movie. Mostly it met them. But because the novel is my favorite thing ever, when the movie started going off of the novel in ways that didn't serve the movie, I got a little disappointed. It's like somewhere between like 4 and 4.5 stars. With Frankenstein, we're starting to get like, we'll call it like 4.25. So Surrender was 4 stars. Frankenstein's getting into like 4.25 territory. So the moments where it ventured off of the book, it took some bite out of the creature. It introduced this whole new character in Christopher Waltz. It did some other things. It didn't really serve the movie, in my opinion. And so some of the dialogue was a little cheesy, but overall, really, really loved it. Also, what I've learned recently is that there is a 1918 edition of Frankenstein that Mary Shelley published years before the widely. I'm holding this up like y'all know the difference. I just bought this. This is the 1918 original novel of Frankenstein that Mary Shelley published first. And it was thought to be, I think, a little bit too ahead of its time, basically. And so then she republished Frankenstein in 1918, I want to say like 1831, and is a little more conservative. It had a few changes that I don't exactly know yet, And so I told y'all I'm going on a cruise, and so I am going to be reading the 1818 version of Frankenstein on my cruise. I'm taking this with me just so I can kind of refer to it back and forth a little bit to try to note some of the differences for myself. And then me and one of my friends are going to do a podcast, another novel podcast, early next year at some point on the 1818 Frankenstein. I'm very excited about that one. All right, y'all, rounding down to number 6, Best Wishes for All. Now, if you look this movie up, you're going to be confused because Best Wishes for All is a Japanese movie. It was released under 2 different names, I think. Best Regards for All, Best Wishes for All. It says it's a 2023 movie everywhere you look, but it was a 2025 United States release. And in fact, Variety, I think Variety, named it as one of the best movies of 2025. So it is definitely considered a 2025 United States movie. I just watched this movie last night, and I'm so glad that I did before I made this podcast because it wouldn't have even ended up in my list. But it got to number 6 on my list at about a 4.25. I don't even know what to say about this movie. So this movie may need a full podcast. Best Wishes Doll is a Japanese horror movie, and the premise is that there's not enough happiness in the world to go around, right? And if there's only a finite amount of happiness to go around in the world, then how does one get happiness? And so this movie explores how that's done. The movie is so bizarre. It has just these moments of like, what the fuck that constantly happen. Also, these moments of humor. I'll just tell you, there's this moment where someone gets hit by a truck and he just flies through the air in this really dramatic way. Immediately after this really beautiful scenery shot that happens somewhere in Japan, it's just absolutely gorgeous. There's these really horrible, gory moments of bloody eyeballs and like axes and sewn eyeballs. I mean, it is got all the amazing elements of horror from beautiful scenery shots. The sound design is so off-putting in this movie. Last night I remember just sitting in the sound bath of the sound, the dread sounds, but then they had these nature sounds whenever it transitioned to the woods or walking through the mountains, and like the squelching sound every time there was blood or an eyeball. Blech. It was just absolutely disgusting. Okay, y'all, rounding out number 5, and now we're going to start getting it to 4.5 stars. So these are basically 90% movies. These are almost perfect movies, in my opinion. The first movie is The Long Walk. And The Long Walk was written by Richard Bachman, which is Stephen King's pen name, in, I believe, 1979. And The Long Walk had just an entire cast of young adult actors, including Cooper Hoffman, which I found out later was Philip Seymour Hoffman's son. And now that I know that, I cannot unsee the resemblance. It's absolutely wild. And David Johnson, they're the 2 main young men in this movie. This movie is incredibly violent. I gotta say, big old trigger alert for this one. However, just the juxtaposition of the violence with the love and cooperation and care that the boys show for each other on the long walk just make this movie such a whiplash movie. One minute you're on this extreme polar end of just shock and disgust and outrage, and then the next minute you're just over here and just this power of human empathy and love and support, and then you're back over here. And so this movie just gave me emotional whiplash in a way that I haven't felt in a lot of movies. I remember reading the book, The Long Walk, and I actually read the novel, The Long Walk, this year, and knowing this movie was going to come out. I read the novel, absolutely loved it, and I thought to myself, there's no way they're going to be able to make a movie out of this because it's just dialogue of boys walking. Really, it is. But Stephen King, being the master writer he is, makes it entertaining, makes it insightful, makes it thoughtful, makes it scary. But they did it. Somehow they fucking did it with this movie, and it knocked my freaking socks off. I can't help but to compare the novel to the movie, and I will say that the movie did differ from the novel in some ways, but unlike Frankenstein, I did not dislike the way that the movie differed from the book. The ways that the movie differed from the book were, first of all, it didn't spend a whole lot of time on unnecessary detail, and second of all, the endings were different, but the ending worked, in my opinion. for the type of movie that The Long Walk was. The Long Walk is a dystopian social commentary film, horror film, in my opinion. And in the way the movie ended really just drove that point home, in my opinion. All right, so then moving on to the top four. All right, the top four. And this movie still has 4.5 stars. Number four is The Monkey. So The Monkey is an Osgood Perkins movie. I will say Osgood Perkins did have another movie come out this year called Keeper. And again, because of kind of the mixed reviews on that movie, I haven't seen that movie. The Monkey is a horror comedy, and it stars Theo Johnson and Adam Scott. Elijah Wood's in it. Those are some of the big names that you might know. Theo James is in it double. He has a twin in the movie. This movie made me laugh so fucking hard. It takes, like, for horror comedy to make me laugh, it just needs to go over the top, or it needs to be really self-aware. It needs to know that it's dumb and it's making fun of itself in some kind of way. But this movie went over the top in ways that were so hilarious that I just laughed the entire time, and it had these moments of gore, and I'm just like laughing right now even thinking about the scene where this person like dives into this pool and just it's electrified, and they just oh my god. So this movie is also based on a Stephen King book, actually, now that I think about it. Uh, this movie is about this monkey who basically causes bad shit to happen. And it's sort of this like generational curse, this family curse kind of thing. And shenanigans. Shenanigans that happen. It's been a while since I saw this movie, to tell you the truth, but I just, as I'm talking about it, I remember how it made me feel, and I'm obviously smiling. And it was just so much fun, and it was hilarious, and gory and supernatural. I don't think it was scary. I don't remember it being scary, but just the horror comedy element just nailed it. All right, y'all, moving on to number three. I gotta say, my number one, number two, and number three movies are 5-star movies. These movies are perfect movies, in my opinion. 3 perfect movies came out this year, which is absolutely incredible. Two interesting facts. I saw all 3 of these movies at the Britannia Theater in New Orleans. Shout out Britannia, which the owner of that theater is a friend of ours named Eric. Hey, Eric. And then 2 of the 3 movies I saw at the Overlook Film Festival. Shout out Overlook Film Festival. I actually wrote the Overlook Film Festival an email, and I was like, y'all need to let me come to y'all's film festival next year, and like let me have exclusive podcast rights or something. See, this is me trying to grow my podcast for next year, because I'm always shouting out their movies. I absolutely love their movies. I saw 2 of these movies. I saw Good Boy last year. Without further ado, number 3 is The Ugly Stepsister. The Ugly Stepsister is a take on the Brothers Grimm, Cinderella, but from the point of view of one of the ugly stepsister. It starts out with her mother driving this. Her mother driving her to do all of these batshit crazy procedures. The question it poses is what will you do for beauty? And the crazy thing is, the ugly stepsister in this movie starts out, I mean, she's a beautiful person. I just looked down, I saw someone's review. It says The Substance But Make It Bridgerton. Nailed it. Yeah, because this is a body horror period piece, basically, about beauty standards. And so, yeah, she was already pretty girl. She was a beautiful girl. Her mother's pushing her to be more beautiful because she wants her to marry the prince. But then, so she's mutilating her body in all these different ways. And then she starts mutilating herself. Then she takes on those messages from her mother and starts doing it to herself. The beautiful thing about The Ugly Stepsister, I actually saw the director in person at the Overlook Film Festival give commentary about this movie. Her name is Emile Litchfield. This is her directing debut, and she puts out this fucking masterpiece. Emile, her intention was to make each character of the Ugly Stepsister sympathetic, and she absolutely succeeded. Even the evil stepmother, you have sympathy for her because she's just trying to survive. There's really not a single person in this whole movie that you just don't have sympathy for. Emile said that she related to the ugly stepsister and she wanted to make a movie about the ugly stepsister. So, which really, the ugly stepsister is all women in society really just like trying to chase this beauty standard, just trying, like The Substance, right? Just trying to be younger, trying to be prettier. And what place will you go to? Ask the question, but it takes place in this period piece. It is so amazing. And it has this hero that emerges at the end, which is amazing. It is fucking disgusting. Some of the body horror moments in this movie, It's very rare that I have to look away from a screen at a movie theater, but I had to look away from the movie theater screen a few times during this movie because I could not take it. I could not take it. This had some disgusting body horror. It also had some comedy elements. There was a moment in this movie where I just got belly laughed so hard in the theater, and I wasn't the only one. Basically, she I'll just go ahead and tell you. She's trying to cut off her toes to fit her toes into the glass slipper, and her mom comes in and catches her in the process, and she's just cut off her toes. And the mom's like, Elvira, that's the wrong foot. Timing was perfect. There's a scene in there where like these like silkworms are making a dress for Cinderella that's really funny. There's just this butthole shot that's just really prominent. It's just like just a butthole that just like, why do we need to zoom in on the butthole? But they did, and it was just great. So it's like had elements of comedy, body horror. It was a feminist movie. It was just absolutely incredible. Okay, number 2 is Sinners. 5-star movie, no doubt about it. I've seen a lot of award season nominations come out, and Sinners is being recognized as it should be. There is nothing, honestly, just say anything about this movie and you're going to get it right. Cinematography, soundtrack, acting, storyline, gore, horror, everything. Musical. This movie has literally everything. It's a period piece. It's folk. It's family dynamics. It's social commentary. It's supernatural. It's got comedy in it. The soundtrack slaps. Rocky Road to Dublin. It blends the racist South with Irish folklore. If you haven't seen Sinners by now, go see it. I don't even know how to describe this movie. It's so amazing. I cried multiple points throughout this movie. There's some complaints about this movie that the first 2/3 of this movie is a lot of is story building, right? You're getting to know the characters, you're getting to know their history, and they're moving towards opening this juke joint. And there's not any horror elements. You're just really getting to know them. They're moving the plot line along. And then this vampire outbreak happens. And then it gets gory, it gets scary. And a lot of people were like, said they didn't really like the fact that it did a lot of story building. It wasn't really a lot of horror up front. But in my opinion, you have to have all that in this movie up front because once the horror breaks out, you are so invested in these characters that the time that it took to build story build and character build up front absolutely has a payoff. There's a scene in this movie where they summon the ancestors through music that is the most beautiful representation of ancestral healing through arts and community that I have ever seen in my life. And I just wept both times I've seen this movie. I wept during that scene. There's a Balinese concept called Taksu where the Balinese people use dance and music to call down their ancestors. I learned this through the Haunted Objects podcast. I will actually link that in this show because it's one of my favorite episodes ever of the Haunted Objects podcast. Long story short, they had a Balinese ritualistic mass and they did research on it and found this out about like Balinese spiritual practices. But this is exactly what happens in the movie, and the word is called Taksu. We all experience all that feeling when you're listening to your favorite song, you're at a concert, and it feels like a spiritual experience. And they capture that in this movie. It's so good, y'all. And finally, this podcast is going to end very, very anticlimactically because my number 1 horror movie of 2025 is Furuwaka. And currently, there are 3 podcast episodes out right now on Furuwaka. There's a 2-part series where Neil and I unpack Furuwaka from the framework of generational trauma. And there is a 3rd episode on Furuwaka in which I invite Emily Carding, who is an actor, an author, and something of a Shakespeare expert, and an all-around just incredible human being, educates us on Irish folklore and the She, which are the antagonist in the movie Furuwaka. So I would direct you to those 3 episodes if you would like to know why I love Furuwaka so much, which is an Irish folk film. So I am just tallying up here what I feel like is the main themes, and it looks like the number 1 themes are, I don't know what to call this, family dynamics. Okay, I don't know. I'm sure there's some better subgenre for that, but we're just going to call that family dynamics. We're going to call that something else, but we'll think about it. Family dynamics, supernatural, both got 5 points each. Supernatural is anything that just couldn't possibly take place, right? There need to be some supernatural element, right? So immediately I'm looking at Sinners, The Monkey, Weapons has a supernatural element. I can't remember which ones I ranked as supernatural. And then let's see, I've got some 3 pointers here. I've got comedy with 3 points. I've got social commentary as 3 points. My social commentary movies were most definitely The Long Walk, most definitely Best Wishes for All, and I do believe maybe I said that The Ugly Stepsister probably was the other one. Hell, Sinners could have been a social commentary movie. Frankenstein could be a social commentary movie. A lot of these could be a social commentary movie. And then period pieces with 3 points. So Sinners and Ugly Stepsister for sure were period pieces. Frankenstein was a period piece. Yep, that makes sense. So I would say, yeah, those are my top categories: family dynamics, period pieces, social commentary, supernatural, and comedy. So there you have it, folks. That is my top 10 from 2025. I hope that helps you explore 2025 movies at your leisure, or with if you have a little time off during the holidays. Happy holidays, no matter what you celebrate: Christmas, Hanukkah, Yule, or if you don't celebrate at all, that's okay. We're not celebrating. We don't want to celebrate. Exorcist Within will see you in 2026. I'm going to mark that as season 2 starting in 2026. And I cannot wait to see what 2026 holds for all of you. One more little point here, Exorcist, before I conclude this 2026 season. I wanted to say what I exercised as a result of doing this final countdown episode. I feel like I exercised the demon of having to make myself small, this demon of minimization. So, for those of you that know me in real life, or maybe through this podcast, you might know that I've got a lot of big feelings. I've got a pretty big personality, and it hasn't always been welcome in different spaces or with different people. And so, if you have made it all the way to this point in the podcast, I have held you to some extent as a captive audience. Mwahahaha. But no, for real, in real life, I do have so many wonderful human beings that hold space for all my big expressive parts, and I'm so grateful for all of them. And my wish for you is that you find people in your life that will accept you for who you are too. But in the meantime, it did feel good to have this captive audience and get to express my feelings about art and a genre that I just love so dearly. So thank you so much for listening. Best wishes to all, and okay, bye.